Hi! In this video, we're going to continue talking about functions. And as you may recall from our last lesson, functions are a way to teach Carol new words. So why do we use functions? Well, there are a few reasons. First, it helps break our program into smaller parts. And if we can separate our program into smaller parts, it can make the problem-solving aspect of our code easier. We can also use functions to make our code easier to understand. And lastly, we can use functions so that we don't have to repeat our code. So like we did last time, instead of having to repeat turn left 3 times, now we can just say turn right. So again, breaking our code into parts simplifies the problem and can make it easier to solve. Instead of trying to solve a whole problem at once, we can break it into small parts and then solve each of those small parts, which are all a part of the larger problem. Using functions also makes it easier for you to read your code and to understand your code, and it also makes it easier for myself and others to understand and read your code. Because oftentimes when you're working on larger coding projects, you're working with a team of coders. So it's important that everybody can understand and read each other's code, and when you put it into functions, it's nice and easy to read and organized. Functions are one of the most important parts of programming, and the purpose of programming is really just to teach a computer new things to do, and that is exactly what functions are. Functions make it easier for us to program and easier for others to read our programs. Functions are really one of the key building blocks of computer science. In fact, all programming languages let you write functions. Let's take a look, though, at writing functions in Karel. This is the general format for a function in Python. Remember, we start all of our functions with DEF, short for define, and then the code that we want our function to run goes indented below. When we give a function a name, it is crucial that we name our function something that tells us what the function does. Using a name like my function or function number 1 is not going to tell us anything about what that function does. But when we name it something like turn right, then we automatically know, okay, that function's going to turn right, okay? And if someone else is reading your code, they would know too. When we name our functions, we should follow a few basic rules here. So let's look at some examples of how we should name our functions. So when you name your function, the name should start with a letter and cannot have any spaces. If you recall, instead of spaces, we usually put an underscore. Okay, that way there's no spaces to break up the function name. All of the letters should be lowercase, and the words are separated with an underscore, and this is commonly referred to as snake case. So snake case is just when everything is lowercase and words are separated by underscores. The name should describe what the function does, and the name should start with an action verb and sound like a command. So it's a good way to think about when we're telling Karel the dog what to do. We want to give the computer or Karel a command. So here's some examples. And we have first, build tower, spin twice, build tower, 5 moves, tower, blah, blah. So at the top here are some examples of good function names. They are all lowercase, there's no spaces, words are separated with an underscore, the first word is an action verb, and it is giving a command. In the third one, build tower, it is not a good function name because the two words are placed right next to each other with no underscore. So if we add an underscore, then that would be a good function name. For 5 moves, that wouldn't be a good function name either because it has to start with a letter. It can't start with a number. Also, there's more things, right? This is not an action that doesn't start with an action verb, and it's not giving a command. So if we were to change this to a good function name, what would we want to name it? Well, the action would be to move, and we want it to move 5 times. The next one is tower. Now, it doesn't start with a number, there's not 2 words, but it's not an action or a command. So if we wanted to build a tower, then we should give that function the name build underscore tower. And the next one, blah, blah. I mean, there's lots of things wrong with this, but first of all, it's not descriptive. If you have a function called blah, blah, I have no idea what that function does. Your classmates and your team has no idea what that does. And so we need to give it a more descriptive name. It also has 2 words combined together without an underscore, but really something that would be better would be like take 4 balls, right? If we want Karel to take 4 balls. All right, now let's talk about defining a function versus calling a function. So we looked at naming our functions, but there's an important distinction between defining a function and then actually using that function. So defining is like teaching Karel a new word. So we're saying like when we define turn right, whenever you're basically telling the computer, whenever I say turn right, this is what I mean. But when you call the function, that's when you actually tell the computer to do it. So if you just define a function, it's like saying, hey Karel, whenever I say turn right, what I mean is go left 3 times. And Karel's like, perfect, great, I got it. I'll wait for you to say it. I understand now. And if you never call that function, and if you never give Karel that command, that part of your code will never run. Okay, so you need to make sure that you teach Karel the new word and then use it. Okay, and then give Karel the command. And remember that you must define the function before you call it. Because if you try to call a function and your function's defined somewhere below, well, you haven't taught Karel that. You haven't taught your computer what that means yet, and your computer will give an error. Another way to think about this is that defining the function is like writing the instructions of the new action, but when you actually want it to happen, you need to call the function. Okay, so calling the function causes the action to happen. Let's look at some examples where we created a function called turnaround. This is like teaching Karel a new command to turn around, but just because we defined it doesn't mean that Karel's going to do it. So this is us teaching Karel. This is us telling Karel to do it. This is our call to the function turnaround. So here we are calling the function turnaround. So again, here's how we define. We write def, we write def, turnaround. This is what I mean when I say turnaround. And then this is how we use it. This is how we call it. So when we actually want Karel to turn around, we would just write the name of the function with 2 parentheses. And then we could add more commands to this, and Karel could turn around, move twice, and then turn left. We can then call the turnaround function again, because now that Karel knows the command, we can call it as many times as we want to without having to redefine the function. We only need to teach Karel and teach your computer the definitions of what things mean one time, and then we can call it and use it as many times as we need. So remember, this is how we teach Karel a new command with the def and the indentations. And this is how we call the function and tell Karel to perform the action. Oops. And the definition needs to appear before the call. All right, let's go write some functions in the editor.